Good evening, everybody. I always love these events because it reminds me what my wife Tracy and I love about New Canaan. We've seen some old friends tonight, and it's always great to be involved with the great New Canaan Library. Ely Callaway, anybody who has ever had any association with the sport of golf knows the name. I dare say anybody who's a golfer here has used a big Bertha driver in an effort to hit the ball farther, which is usually successful. I don't think anybody has had more of a positive impact on the sport of golf than Ely Callaway. And he did so with a reputation for integrity and ingenuity and legacy, and understood the game of golf so well. So, Nick, I am pleased to be up here with Nicholas. We're both fortunate to have two relatively famous fathers, but we both have managed to carve out decent careers for ourselves. So I get the ball rolling. Nicholas, what prompted you in Ely, and it is Ely, everyone you've probably heard has called him Ely Callaway, but Nicholas has told me that his real name is Ely Callaway, so I'm not making a mistake. Tell us about the book, how you got involved. Obviously, as the film said, your dad started it. Talk about why he wanted to write the book, what your involvement has been since then, and the amazing artificial intelligence that is part of the story.
It really is an honor to be here in New Canaan because I grew up here with Ely. So this is and I was born in Darien. So this is a real homecoming, and thank you to the New Canaan Library, and especially I'm so pleased that you would join me, Sean. What an honor. And we're meeting for the first time today. But we have already talked a bit about fathers and sons. And so I think that's going to be a motif that you'll hear about. The project started 30 years ago, toward the end of Ely's life. He was born in 1919, passed away in 2001. And when Callaway Golf was changing the game and changing the industry, and having grown up with this fascinating father, I felt that he should write his life story. He worked with 4 different writers. Finally, Larry Dorman, then the head golf writer of the New York Times, but he passed away before finishing it and left behind hundreds of pages of interviews, transcripts, handwritten notes, and it sat there for a generation. And during COVID, I felt that for a variety of reasons that I wanted to complete the story that he started, and that's why we've done it. But the reason I wanted to do it was twofold. He had an amazing life, and he had that rare quality of vision, of being able to see far, far ahead. And I think you will find in the book that again and again, whether it is about the game of golf, whether it's about business, globalization, international trade, tariffs, civil rights, equality in higher education, the book reads as though it were written this week, literally. And that was my main hope, is that what he had to share would be relevant, and I hope that you find that it is.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about AI and the importance of that to this book.
So I think you and I share something very profound, which is we have fathers who changed America through the power of storytelling. I wanted to ask you a bit about that, because you mentioned to me that...
I'm the only one up here authorized to ask questions. So please keep that in mind. No, go ahead.
I can go on and on.
I know, no.
That's my fear. But Ely was, like your father, a great storyteller. And I grew up with countless dinners of hearing Ely tell stories. And everyone who ever met Ely never forgot him, and everyone's got an Ely story still. So as we were putting together the written book, which took about 2 years of research and then of editing with a young editor named Andrew Moorhead, I kept wanting, or I kept in my ear, I kept hearing Ely. And I thought, what if we could bring him back in the written word? And because the style of the book is conversational, but I thought, because he had a unique way of expressing himself. He was born in Georgia, Southwest Georgia, 1919. He was a storyteller in the grand Southern tradition. And so we spent 2 years, and so Ely is back, telling us his life story in the written word, and in the world's first posthumously narrated by the author AI audiobook. Would you like to hear a bit? So we're going to play for you 2 clips. The first is the historical Ely toward the end of his life in addressing a business meeting, so you can hear what the actual voice sounded like. And here's Ely coming back 24 years after his passing, and now
Identical. They're identical.
I said when I started, I set myself the goal that we would not release this, because the technology did not exist 3 years ago, unless and until I couldn't tell the difference.
Yeah, no, it's remarkable. Well done. And you and I talked a number of times, and you used the word storyteller. And my dad considered himself first and foremost a storyteller. When I used to call him a sports announcer, he would say an announcer is somebody who reads copy for commercials and reads billboards. I am not a sports announcer, I'm a sports commentator. So I said, thank you, Dad, I will not make that mistake again. He loved the stories about athletes, and he didn't do the major sports. He didn't do a lot of NFL football or college football or baseball or basketball. He did all the other sports, horse racing and car racing and gymnastics, and those sports we all remember on Wide World of Sports, arm wrestling, and we all remember the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. But he really was a storyteller, and you could be watching a horse race or a car race or a weightlifting event or a gymnastic event, and by the time you finished watching, you were as interested in the athletes themselves as you were of the score. So I think we'll talk tonight about a lot of similarities between your dad and my dad, but storytelling is definitely one up there. I just wanted to, Ely just referenced it, 3 amazing careers in 3 disparate areas: textiles, winemaking, and golf. Don't normally go on the same resume. Talk about how your dad and why he was so successful in each of those very, very different industries.
He had 3 careers. The first of them, I think he epitomized the best of post-war American industry. In textiles, he devoted himself to it for over 30 years, starting, as you heard, in the Second World War, and ultimately rising to the top of the world's largest textile company, Burlington Industries. But as you'll read in chapter 4, his plans were derailed by a crisis, not of his making, but one that he struggled for 5 years to solve. He failed, he was fired, and he wrote his 3 children a letter saying, just wanted you to all know I'm leaving New York and I'm moving to the desert of Southern California. I'm going to plant some grapes. And he did that for 10 years, became one of the pioneering premium California wine makers and growers. And then at the age of 63 in 1982, started Callaway Golf with two gentlemen in a garage in Indian Wells, California, and within 10 years built it into the world's largest golf club company.
Yeah. Only golf company at the time to be registered on the New York Stock Exchange. And as you said, the largest, it's worth repeating, largest golf manufacturing company in the world. I was really lucky growing up as the son of Jim McKay. You were lucky growing up the son of Ely. Talk about what it was like to be his son and some of the lessons, not just necessarily in business, but in life that you learned from the great man.
Well, I'll give just one example, which was that by the time he founded Callaway Golf, of his 63 years, he had been playing golf for 60 years. And the first page of the book has a photo of the first day Ely Callaway swung a golf club, and he was 3. So I had the great privilege of growing up. I knew my dad as a corporate leader, but I learned to walk up the fairway at Weber & Country Club, holding my parents' hands. They were the club champions in 1957. So for me, it made perfect sense when he went into the golf business, because I knew that was his greatest love in life. But you ask about life lessons. We actually have distilled them in his own voice in the book as little breakouts called Elyisms. And I would say that the 3 most, there were many things I learned from him, but the 3 really things that come to mind. Persistence, never giving up, resilience. He had extraordinary, he used to say, yes, well, if you try and you try and you try, and then you try again, you might succeed. So that's the first of them. I think the second is honesty and integrity. And the book, I think, is animated by his struggle to always uphold the ethical and moral values that he believed in, and to set an example for others. And the last one, and we have a very special guest tonight, because I've just learned something about Ely's life that I didn't know, and I was going to say it's maybe the most important lesson. And it is, he added one rule to the 34 rules of golf, and it's Rule 35, and it is enjoy the game. Now, I have thought until this afternoon that Ely came up with that because he was a great namer, but I've just learned from Patrick Moynihan, who is here with us, that he gave that line to Ely. So thank you. Thank you. Nice. It's profound and it's beautiful. And Patrick just gave me the ball with Rule 35, the original that says enjoy the game.
Fantastic. When you and I talked earlier, and the lessons that I learned from my dad, and I will also say from my mom, because she was in many ways raising us as my dad was traveling all around the world doing these great sporting events, but the same lessons. Trying your best, be the first one in the office, turn the lights on, turn the lights off when you leave in the evening. Integrity, which if you don't have integrity and honesty, you don't have anything, quite frankly. And be, a man of your word. And then it follows up on the saying on that golf ball: if you're not enjoying what you're doing, then you shouldn't be doing it. And he was so lucky in that he found a job that was uniquely suited to his talents. We talked about him being a great storyteller. He was a great writer. He was a great interviewer of people, and all those qualities entered into why he became what he was. But, as you and I talked, growing up as the son of Jim McKay was pretty cool. I got to go to the Indy 500, U.S. Open Golf, Olympics, the World Water Skiing Championships down in Florida. Even went to the World Synchronized Swimming Championships, which was interesting for a young boy. But it was fantastic. And I knew, and I was really lucky from the time I was 12 years old, that I wanted to go into sports television. I had a brief stint down on Wall Street, which was very invigorating. And, my mom said, wouldn't you like a more stable career in banking as opposed to traveling all over the world covering sporting events? And I said, no, I think I really want to be in the truck producing a World Series or a Super Bowl. So I take that from him in terms of showing me what it was like to be someone covering the world of sports. We just had one of the most, if not the amazing Masters. I'm sure many people in this room watched and were cheering on either Rory or Justin. Maybe best ever. We could argue that. But Augusta National and the Masters had a big impact on your dad. Talk about how Bobby Jones and Augusta National kind of shaped some of his perspectives and some of his views.
Bobby Jones was Ely's hero. He was his moral North Star. He was his cousin. And I think one of the discoveries of the book, from page 2 until almost the last page, is the profound influence that Bobby Jones had on Ely throughout his life. It began, the origin moment was 1930. Ely is 11 years old, listening to the transatlantic radio with his mother, listening to Bobby win the Grand Slam, and his mother saying, that is the greatest sportsman of all time, and he's your cousin, Ely. This inspires Ely to take up the game. How does he learn? Bobby went to Hollywood the next year and did a series of instructional films with Hollywood celebrities for 3 years. Ely goes down and learns the game by watching the films in the movie theater in LaGrange. And he becomes a top teenage champion, thinks about turning pro, meets Bobby after the war. They become very close friends. Bobby clearly sees Ely as a protege and kindred spirit. And so I can't begin to encompass the scope or how meaningful this relationship is between them, but I think what it offers us today as well.
Yeah, as many of you know, Bobby was maybe the greatest amateur golfer ever. Decided that he was never going to turn professional. He played the game not for money, purely for the love of the game. Decided to build a little golf course down south outside of Atlanta called Augusta National. Created the Masters, which is still, I think, the most coveted title and most famous golf event in the world. and was just, my father told a story once about Bobby Jones, and also if you have kids or grandkids and they're looking for a sports hero to model themselves after, you'll never find anybody greater than Bobby Jones. I talked to my son Jackson about him when he was a little boy, and he knows everything there is to know about Bobby Jones's life. But my dad told me this story. Bobby was playing in a major championship. I'm not sure which one it was, but he was playing in a major championship. He went to move the grass around his ball, and his ball moved, and that is a one-stroke penalty in the game of golf. Nobody saw him. When he finished the round, he said, "I didn't shoot a 71 today. I shot a 72. I'm calling a one-stroke penalty on myself because on the 16th hole, my ball moved." And it cost him the championship. He would have, if he had not done that, he would have been in a playoff. It cost him the championship. And somebody said to him afterwards, "Congratulations on doing something, so morally upstanding, and congratulations for doing that." And he said, "You know something? That's a little bit like congratulating me today for not robbing a bank." In his mind, that was the way you led your life, with honesty. And that's why today, golf is, I think, the only sport that doesn't have a referee looking at you. And so many times something has happened, and most golfers will say, calling a penalty stroke on yourself is the way you should behave in golf, but it's also the way you should behave in life. So your love and your dad's love of Bobby Jones, he definitely has been one of my idols and role models going forward, and he could not have picked a better man to emulate and to learn from. I didn't know that your dad met him at that age, and I didn't know your dad learned the game of golf from watching those videos. It's a great story.
It is a great story, and we'd like to play, if we have a couple minutes, one last clip. How are we doing on time?
Oh, we're fine. Yeah. You guys don't have any plans tonight, do you?
So, in fact, the great story you just told, Ely himself tells in the book, because it was so impactful on his life. He tells that same story, and you told it perfectly, because it's almost verbatim what he says at the end of the book. The present of the book is June 2001, a few weeks before Ely passes away. He knows he's leaving us, and he tells two last stories. One is what he calls his last idea with the big three, Arnold Palmer, Gary Player, and Jack Nicklaus, which had its roots in 1960 when Mark McCormick founded IMG. But Ely's last thoughts in life turned to Bobby Jones, and why he was so important to him, and him trying to define what he thought made him great. So here, Sean just told us this story, so there you have Ely telling it too. You can see the importance that Bobby had in Ely's life from beginning to end. Am I allowed to ask a question now, Sean?
Definitely, yes, without question.
I wanted to ask some of your perspective about your father and his own career. Mm-hmm. And we both have fathers who found themselves many, many times at critical moments in history. And your father certainly, he not only made history and changed America, but also found himself at a very transformative and tragic moment in American history and sports.
He did. probably the worst day in the history of sports, the 1972 massacre of the 11 Israeli athletes at the Munich Olympics. My family was there with my dad. It was billed as the Serene Olympics. The Germans wanted to put aside the thoughts and the memories of the 1936 Olympics, which which Hitler used to promote his Aryan race. It was only 35 or 36 years since the closing of Dachau and the concentration camps, so they wanted it to be a Serene Olympics. The guards didn't carry guns. They wore light blue suits, and that serenity was breached when the terrorists scaled the wall outside the Olympic Village, went in, immediately killed 2 of the Israeli members. And my dad was thrown into the situation. He wasn't the host of the Olympics. He was covering gymnastics and track and field. He was called into the studio by Roone Arledge, and he sat down in the chair and was there for 22 hours without leaving, telling the story of this horrible kidnapping and then killing of the Israeli athletes. And you have to remember that terrorism was not in our vernacular back then. It was not something that people talked about. It certainly didn't happen around a sporting event. No internet, no cable television, no 24-hour news station. So the men and women of ABC Sports were covering this story live for 900 million people around the world. The only way you could watch the horrifying coverage was through my dad's eyes. And he became more known for that than anything else he had ever done, just because of the way he handled it and the empathy that he showed while literally talking and explaining what was going on to the entire world. And then there were words at 2 o'clock in the morning that all the Israeli athletes had been rescued at the airport, and they wouldn't really go with that story because it wasn't confirmed. And then at 3 o'clock in the morning, maybe it was 2 o'clock in the morning, my dad was talking to Peter Jennings, the great ABC news anchor, and Chris Schenkel, old-time announcer, and they're talking about, Peter knew a lot about the Middle East because he was the ABC News Middle East correspondent at the time. They were talking about that, and my dad went like that in his ear. You could tell he was being told something. And he looked at the camera and he said, my dad once told me that your worst fears and greatest hopes are seldom realized. Well, tonight our worst fears were realized. They have now said that there were 11 Israeli hostages. 2 were killed in their rooms this morning, and 9 were killed at the airport tonight. And he looked in the camera and he said, they're all gone. And those words became some of, if I won't say the most famous, but some of the most famous words. It's right up there with Walter Cronkite announcing live the death of John F. Kennedy. And he was always conflicted about this because it catapulted his career into heights that he never could imagine. But, his greatest moment and his greatest hosting or anchoring job came on the worst day in the history of sports. So, as I said, he was conflicted, but he did a remarkable job. And, until he passed away, people who would come up to him in airports and, come over to his table at dinner, 95% of them would say to him not, oh, I remember you on the Indy 500 or US Open Golf. What I remember is your humanity and the job that you did in 1972. And people come up to me when they learn that, who my dad is, say the same thing. We'll never forget what he did. So,
can I ask you where you were at that time and what was?
Yeah, I was in the studio. I was in the studio next to him or in the control room. And
what
again,
were your feelings?
we didn't understand the worldwide global impact of what was happening. My feelings were, one, how much longer can he do this? Because he did it for so long in that one chair. How much of a toll it's taking on him. And I'll tell you just one quick side story. There was a weightlifter on the team named Daniel Berger, who was born and raised in Shaker Heights, Ohio, but moved to Israel and was therefore qualified to be on the Israeli Olympic weightlifting team. His parents, Dr. Berger and Mrs. Berger, lived in Shaker Heights. My dad referenced that. And throughout the day, in the back of his mind, he knew that Mr. and Mrs. Berger were going to find out if their son was dead or alive through my father's voice. And he always had that in the back of his mind. He subsequently later met the Bergers, and they, said to him as completely and totally tragic and as devastating as that was, the fact that we could see in your eyes and hear in your voice, what this awful tragedy meant was in some ways comforting to them. But, to know that you're going to say to this family in Shaker Heights from a little studio in Munich, West Germany, that your son is no longer alive was something that he carried that burden and that emotion with him his entire life.
It's an amazing story. It makes me realize that our fathers set an example for all of us of the defining moments in our lives that determine whether we're going to rise to the best of us or not. And it involves tremendous courage and to take a leap into the unknown. And they both, I think, were able to do that.
Questions. I'll just finish by saying that we share a lot, obviously, which is, and I haven't known you for long at all. I met you via email when you emailed me your dad's book, which I read. But I think the best thing we can say about our fathers is that when people come up to us and say, I knew your dad, in business, or I knew him on the golf course, or I knew him through this association, they all say with utmost sincerity that when it came to kindness and integrity and talent, that your dad had it all. And that's, unusual. And, being, as you well know, the son of somebody who's pretty famous can be a bit of a burden. And I'm not saying it was a burden for me at all, because it was a blessing.
For me too.
But for you too. But it can, it can change your perspective on life. But the fact that both of our dads instilled in us, so much the importance of character, I think has led to whatever modest success we've had in life.